This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream and Nebula. Another year has passed. It went by so quickly, didn't it? Anyways, hello, my name is Tom, I'm the creator of Like Stories of Old, and today we're going to talk about 2022, which I think was a good year for the movies, and a pretty good year for the channel too. I'm especially excited because today I can finally announce a major new project of mine, one that's been more than a year in the making, which will release on January 3rd. But first, let's build some suspense and talk some movies. First up, some last year's editions. There were a bunch of great 2021 movies that I hadn't seen yet when I made my previous Best of the Year video, either because they had not yet been released in my country or because I simply hadn't had a chance to watch them. So without further ado, here's some more 2021 movies that I believe are worth checking out. The Lost Daughter, directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, a beautifully intimate and complex story about motherhood carried by a fantastic performance from Olivia Colman. Mass, directed by Fran Kranz. Two sets of parents meet each other in the wake of a school shooting. Gets just a little melodramatic towards the end, but overall it's an absolutely gripping story that's especially worth watching if you enjoy movies set within a single location. Drive My Car, directed by Ryusuke Hamaguchi. 2021's quintessential story on grief, loneliness, and creating connections despite knowing you'll never truly know another person. The Rescue, directed by Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Vazarelli. Truth proves itself to be both stranger and more powerful than fiction in this incredibly tense and moving documentary about the 2018 rescue of a soccer team inside a flooded cave in Thailand. The Worst Person in the World, directed by Joachim Trier. A highly relatable story about the struggle to figure out your life in the complex and at times overwhelming chaos that is our modern society. After Yang, directed by Kogo Nada. A wonderfully warm and empathetic science fiction movie about a family that struggles to cope with the breaking down of their AI robot. Moving on to 2022. Aside from making video essays, this was also the year that my fellow creator Thomas Flight and I started our new podcast Cinema of Meaning, wherein each week we discuss a movie together to explore the deeper meanings it has to offer. Of the last year's editions, we've already talked about Drive My Car and The Worst Person in the World. And we've also covered a number of 2022 movies that will come up later in this video. But I figured that instead of mentioning every time that there's a corresponding podcast episode you can check out, it would be easier if I just make a little note on the screen with the episode number. So keep an eye out for that if you want a more in-depth discussion. Big thanks to everyone who has been listening so far. Now let's check out some more movies. Before getting into the absolute best of the best, I want to name some honorable mentions. Tony Hawk, Until the Wheels Fall Off, directed by Sam Jones. An insightful documentary about Tony Hawk and the evolution of skateboarding, both of which I was a big fan of as a child, and so I absolutely enjoyed this. All Quiet on the Western Front, directed by Edward Berger. This new adaptation of the classic First World War story has a lot going for it and features some truly heart-pumping sequences. I did have a few reservations about some changes that were made to the original and about the way certain scenes were filmed, which for me prevented it from having a place among the greats. The Lost City, directed by Aaron and Adam Nee. If you're just looking for a fun romantic adventure movie, this would be my 2022 pick. The story is pretty straightforward, but it's elevated by the performances of Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum, who both know exactly what makes them funny and have a great chemistry together. Nope, directed by Jordan Peele. A compelling exploration of spectacle and trauma that I really enjoyed, but that maybe tries to do just a little bit too much in one movie and therefore lacks that tight focus that Peele's previous movies did have. Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, directed by Sophie Hyde. Emma Thompson nails a fantastic performance here as an aging woman in search of physical intimacy. Her counterpart Daryl McCormack is also great, but compared to Thompson's character, his role is slightly underwritten, which leads to some contrived scenes towards the end. The Northman, directed by Robert Eggers. I am a big fan of Eggers, and his newest Viking epic is an absolute must-see. I do think there are some minor pacing issues, and I'm still not sure how to feel about the themes that are being communicated. So until I get a chance to revisit this one, just an honorable mention for now. Avatar, The Way of Water, directed by James Cameron. At the time of recording, it's only been a few days since I've seen this, and so it's just too soon to decide where exactly it stands amongst the other movies that have been released this year. On first impression though, I had an absolute blast with this movie. I think it has a lot more going for it than many critics give it credit for, and I can't wait to watch it again. Moving on to the main event, my favorite movies of the year. Just as last year, these really are my personal favorites, the movies that I found to be most meaningful. There's no ranking, I'll be talking about them in random order, starting with what was probably my favorite theater-going experience of the year, The Menu, directed by Mark Mylod. I got to see The Menu on opening night with a full crowd that was really into it, which is always a fun experience. But the best part is, at the end, everyone got a free cheeseburger, or a veggie burger for people like me who don't eat meat, which is a reference you'll get if you've seen the movie. Anyways, people stayed to hang out and discuss the movie with each other, and it was just a really fun and memorable evening. As for the movie itself, The Menu is about this group of people who are going to a private island for this fine dining experience that's prepared for them by a renowned chef who, as the story unfolds, has some ulterior motives. I won't spoil more than that, because it's just one of those movies that's really fun to go into without knowing anything about it and then just watching the story slowly escalate. It's also a movie that, in my opinion, has not been fully understood by the critics, because many of the initial reviews I read seem to focus only on its eat the rich vibe and its themes about class and power dynamics, which are definitely there, but they're not all that's there. For me, more than anything, The Menu is a story about our relation to art, both from the perspective of the artists as well as of that of the consumer or the beholder of it. As someone who somewhat weirdly navigates both of those aspects, this is an issue that really resonated with me and which I think is an interesting angle to keep in mind when approaching this movie. Also, as a side note, did you get a chance to watch my video on one of my all-time favorite directors who makes these really bleak, almost dystopian movies that nevertheless manage to convey a deep sense of humanity and beauty? In case you don't know him, his name is Bela Tarr, which is not to be confused with Tar, directed by Todd Field. This movie kind of came out of nowhere for me. I pretty much saw it pop up with these raving reviews, and so I didn't even check out the trailer and just went in blind. Anyway, Tar is about a conductor named Lydia Tarr who is preparing for her magnus opus when the sins of her past slowly come to the surface to unravel her entire life. My first impression while watching this was that this was one of the most well-established and most well-rounded characters I've seen all year, backed up by a fantastic performance from Cate Blanchett. Like many other people, I actually had to check real quick to see if this was based on an actual historical person or if it was all fictional, which probably says it all about how realistic her character feels. As many critics have pointed out, Tar is basically a cancellation story. Lydia has done some messed up things in the past, she abused her position of power to her own advantage, and is now about to face the consequences for it. However, as others have pointed out, there's also a certain gothic horror element to it that makes this movie less straightforward than it initially appears. And that makes it more questionable what exactly is real and what is imagined. Personally, I thought it almost felt like a modern retelling of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, or at least it felt like it captured the spirit of that novel in which you have this central character that has committed a wrong even though they tell themselves there's nothing to feel remorse about. And yet, their guilt nevertheless infects their body, causing them to descend into this fever dream state that quietly disconnects them from their reality and from themselves. Either way, it's just an incredible exploration into the depths and inner workings of the human psyche, and despite its length, I'm already eager to watch it again. Athena is a French movie directed by Roman Givray and is truly an edge-of-your-seat rollercoaster ride. The story is about a community that erupts into chaos after one of its members is killed by the police in what seems like an act of senseless violence. Right from the opening scene, the movie grabs you with an exhilarating single-take sequence that might just be the most impressive one of the year. And it never really lets down from there. It is, however, not just the long takes, but also the compositions that are absolutely stunning. At any time there's just so much going on, so much chaos, and it really communicates the primal emotions of fear and anger that are ultimately at the heart of this movie. Regarding the story, I do want to add a small caveat here, because even though the movie obviously deals with very relevant issues and has a clearly contemporary setting, I do think it works best when you approach it more as a Shakespearean tragedy or Greek myth of sorts. There is a certain melodrama to it that seems to care more about the dramatic conflicts and twists than with communicating the nuances of a real-life socio-political situation. And to me that's fine, because again, what I do believe this movie does really well, more than anything, is convey an extremely riveting and resonating emotional atmosphere. One that will certainly get your heart pumping and will have you in awe of its audio-visual storytelling. And speaking of exhilarating spectacle, RRR, directed by S.S. Rajamouli. I'm actually not a total stranger to Indian cinema. I remember really enjoying Singham back in the day, which also had this over-the-top action. I'd also seen Rajamouli's Bahubali, which I thought was a fun adventure movie. In other genres I enjoyed, like Stars on Earth, the road trip movies Indagi Na Milagi Dobara, and the classic Apu trilogy. But still, RRR really surprised me and kind of opened my eyes again to a type of filmmaking that it feels like we in the West have almost forgotten about. Because even with our own larger-than-life superhero stories, we've generally come to assume this very grounded and realistic style, and while this can be very effective, it also feels rather joyless in ways that I didn't even fully realize until I saw RRR. It actually had a bit of a whiplash effect on me initially, because on first impression the movie is just so hyper-sincere, so extremely over the top, and so cheesy that I can imagine some people would be put off by it. And yet I found that if you just let it wash over you, just surrender yourself to this story, it truly becomes this ecstatic experience. And this is not just because of the amazing visuals and action, but for me it was also because of the genuine bromance that develops between the main characters, and which quickly forms the beating heart of the story. There's just such a great dynamic between the characters. They share enough values and traits to make their bond feel true and honest, while at the same time they are also distinct enough in their personalities for there to be that spark, that rapport between them that creates that fun kind of tension. All in all, it was just such a refreshing experience to me, one that really captured that almost childlike sense of joy that we don't often get anymore. But fortunately, however, there was one blockbuster in the West that achieved something similar. And that is, of course, Top Gun Maverick, directed by Joseph Kosinski. First off, it should be noted that I have no nostalgia whatsoever towards the original Top Gun. I'd only seen that movie once, thought it was really cheesy and quite dated compared to more modern action movies. And so I went into Maverick without any expectations beyond knowing that I was probably going to see some good action, as it was clear that they shot a lot of the flying scenes practically, that is, with Tom Cruise and the other actors actually being in fighter planes. And that aspect of the movie was obviously really well done. It looked incredibly real, it felt extremely immersive, and from a technical point of view, it's just amazing. But the thing I didn't really expect, and the thing that made this movie so meaningful to me beyond the well-done action, was the way it communicated this deep sense of heroic optimism. Now, there's a lot to say about the movie's relation to militarism and war, which I've talked about extensively with Thomas on the podcast, but putting that aside for a minute, I found that beneath it all, it was basically just a story about human beings coming together, working together, growing closer together, and pushing each other towards new heights in order to achieve a common goal. And there's just something truly beautiful about that. And you really feel it in the details too. Take for example how Bob, who is this kind of outsider character who would normally be the butt of the joke, is almost immediately accepted as part of the group here. Or look at the way the supporting crew members are also given plenty of screen time. I especially love that little moment where Rooster salutes the person who prepared this chat for him. It's such a small thing, but it does really emphasize that all this is a team effort in which every role is equally vital. And so, yeah, in the end, it wasn't just a well-written, well-crafted blockbuster movie for me, but also one that genuinely moved me and made me feel hopeful and optimistic about, well, about us, about humanity, which has been this weirdly recurring element in cinema this year, I think. Because aside from these blockbusters, there's also been a number of smaller movies touching on similar themes. But before we continue, I think it's time to unveil my big secret project. One of the questions I get asked most often is, how do I do this? How do I analyze movies and find all these different themes, philosophies and meanings within them? Well, on January 3rd, I'm going to answer that in my brand new Nebula class, How to Analyze Stories and Enrich Your Own. I've been working on this script for over a year, and last October I went all the way to New York to finally produce it. It covers pretty much everything I've learned about storytelling in the last 10 years, starting with the basic building blocks, why do we tell stories, how do you recognize things like story structures, character archetypes and symbolism. After that it goes deeper into the wider context that stories exist within, how to connect stories to different philosophies, how to place and examine them in different socio-political contexts, and so on. Lastly, it covers what I think is an all too often forgotten element in these discussions, which is your own personal connection to stories. You know, what is it about stories that moves us so deeply, that can invoke such a wealth of emotions? And how can we use that not only to get more insight in how stories function, but also to get a better understanding of ourselves and enrich ourselves as human beings? The class is produced by and exclusively available on Nebula, our creator-owned streaming platform. If you're a fan of the channel, you've probably already heard me talk about it. You might even already be watching this video on Nebula and enjoying the ad-free experience it offers. In that case, just a few more days and you'll get instant access to my Nebula class too. If you're not on Nebula yet, the best way to get access is by signing up for CuriosityStream through my personal link, which comes with a free Nebula subscription. And if you're quick about it, you can even profit from the end of the year 42% discount that makes the bundle less than $12 for a whole year. Again, that's less than $12 for an entire year. Long enough to make your way through my new class, to check out some amazing documentaries and non-fiction titles on CuriosityStream, and to watch the exclusive content from your favorite creators on Nebula. So be sure to head on over to curiositystream.com/likestoriesofold to be the first to experience my brand new Nebula class, and to learn more about how to analyze stories and enrich your own. But don't go yet, because we still have some more movies to cover, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed by Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. This to me is the quintessential movie about what it feels like to be alive in 2022. I've already made an in-depth video essay about multiverses as a storytelling mechanic, which, in my personal opinion, might just be the best video I've made this year. That and my video on the myth of heroic masculine purpose, which also has a great personal significance for me, and which discusses a subject that is also present to a lesser extent in Everything Everywhere All at Once. This being the question of what kind of masculinity and more generally what kind of heroism is truly aspirational and which is merely feeding our ego and our grandiosity. Anyways, what made this movie so meaningful for me is that it really captured the more subjective experience of what it feels like to be alive in modern society, and to experience the overwhelming connectivity it has essentially forced us into. It is basically a search for meaning in a world where it has become increasingly difficult to attach ourselves to any one thing in particular, where for every decision we make we are immediately confronted with every possible negation of it. I'm not sure how well the humor and the general over-the-topness of this movie is going to age, but I do genuinely think this will be remembered as one of the first movies to really try and articulate the specific experience of living in the age of the internet, of social media, and of the general interconnectedness that has come to define so much of our social structures and of our personal identities. 2022 was also the year in which Robert Pattinson got to play the Dark Knight in Matt Reeves' The Batman, and I was absolutely captivated by it. For starters, I was already a big fan of both Pattinson's work as an actor. I think he's severely underrated in movies like Cosmopolis, The Rover, High Life and The Lighthouse, and of Matt Reeves' work as a director, most notably the last two entries of the Planet of the Apes trilogy. And so I had a lot of faith in this project, and fortunately for me, it was definitely rewarded. For one, I just love the way this movie communicates so much in such a short amount of time. With just a few scenes, we establish not only the city of Gotham, this iteration of the Batman, and a wonderful new score, but we also get such a strong sense of the vibe of this world. For me, this was probably the most atmospheric Batman movie, which in itself, in my experience, makes this one an absolute joy to rewatch. As for the story, I love the way Bruce Wayne was more clearly a reclusive and troubled young man whose Batman persona is more explicitly problematic. And I mean that in the sense that his vigilantism wasn't portrayed as the product of rational reasoning, but was rather shown to be a misguided and overly simplistic reaction to a complex problem. And as such, I really liked his overall arc from being the shadow that invokes fear to becoming the light that inspires hope. I was hoping we'd also see a stronger conclusion for Bruce Wayne as a citizen, finding his way back into the community, but I guess we have to leave some stuff for the sequel. One downside of making a best of 2022 video in 2022 is that I obviously hadn't had a chance to watch every movie yet. One such movie that doesn't release here until next month, but which would probably be on my list of favorites, is The Banshees of Inisherin. At least that's according to my podcast buddy Thomas Flight, who did get a chance to see it. So Banshees of Inisherin, why do you think it would have been on my list of favorite movies of the year?
On our podcast, Cinema of Meaning, we talked about In Bruges, which I know you like, and this is another movie from Martin McDonagh that brings back the Gleeson-Farrell duo, and it comes back in a different form here, but the chemistry between the two is equally as enjoyable. At its core, it's about these two friends who are having a dispute, but that conflict is representative of several larger conflicts in the film, how we want to be remembered as people, the value of art versus the value of being nice and more respectful to the people around you and your community. And it also mirrors the larger conflict that's kind of happening in Ireland around the fictional location where this movie is set. It also does a great job of just incorporating a sense of place into the film itself. So you get this feeling that you are in Inisherin, not just visually, but also with the pacing of the film, the pacing of the delivery of dialogue and the editing of the scenes. And yeah, I think it's one that you're going to love, and I can't wait to talk about together on our podcast.
Next up is Decision to Leave, directed by Park Chan-wook. This is a highly intriguing and beautifully crafted story that I feel like I really need to watch again in order to fully appreciate. It just feels like one of those movies where you can immediately sense that there are layers of deeper meanings and symbolisms despite not immediately understanding them all and even being quite confused by them. But that to me only made it all the more appealing and fascinating. On the surface, this is basically a murder mystery in which a detective becomes too involved with a suspect in one of his cases. It's clear that there's a connection between them, but they cannot fully trust each other. And because the detective is already married, there's a strong feeling of impossibility, of a this could never be type of situation. And as such, what Decision to Leave really is a story about the pain of longing and about the unspoken desires that define our lives and move it into unexpected and, unfortunately, sometimes also destructive directions. As mentioned before, I do feel this is one of those movies where your first viewing is just the beginning of your relation to it, and one that you come to understand and appreciate more every time you watch it again. It's a complex portrait of the emotions that really drive us and of what this really implies for the connections we form with others. When I was on my way to New York, I finally watched The Fallout, directed by Megan Park. It was one of those movies that I'd heard about but never really got around to, and so I figured, well, I have about 7 hours to kill, I might as well watch it now. It was a big mistake. Not because the movie was bad, but because it was just so much more emotional than I anticipated, and I actually had a hard time trying to keep it together. The Fallout is about the aftermath of a school shooting, which we experience from the perspective of this young girl who doesn't seem to know how to cope with what happened. Because whereas everyone around us seems to have much stronger reactions, whether they turn to activism or just fall into grief, she doesn't seem to feel anything. And yet, at the same time, or better yet, because of that, she just kind of disconnects from herself and from everyone around her. And as such, it really is a story that quietly sneaks up on you and that, despite its heavy subject material, still manages to catch you off guard towards the end. One thing I particularly liked was the unlikely friendship that developed between the main character and this other girl who she was hiding with in the bathroom when the shooting occurred. The moment itself was already this beautiful demonstration of how, whenever something scary or dangerous happens, we almost instinctively reach out to those around us and find comfort and solace in their presence, even if they're complete strangers. To me, this was perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the movie, the way it showed how, even after the traumatic event, it was clear that there was this unspoken bond between these two girls who had nothing in common, but who now nevertheless found themselves deeply connected with each other. And while we're on the subject of solidarity and human beings coming to each other's aid in times of need, 13 Lives, directed by Ron Howard. 13 Lives is a retelling of the same event that was also covered by last year's documentary The Rescue, which was the rescuing of a group of young boys from deep within a flooded cave in Thailand. Now, I don't necessarily believe this is the most interesting movie from a filmmaking perspective, but for me personally it was nevertheless one of the most important movies of the year. And this is mainly because this is just such an incredibly powerful story. One that, in my opinion, highlights humanity at its absolute best, and that demonstrates what real-world heroism actually looks like. Not superheroes flying around and solving issues by punching up bad guys, but ordinary people coming together and giving their absolute best to help their fellow human beings in a desperate situation. I do want to credit Ron Howard a little bit here, because although it feels like a rather straightforward retelling of the real event, it is done with a remarkable level of restraint. The movie is subdued in a way that really emphasizes that the miracle that occurred here was not the result of one amazing act of heroism, but rather of the continued dedication of the thousands of people that were involved in this effort over the course of almost 3 weeks. It shows how real-life heroism is not pretty, it's not cool, it's hard work and sacrifice. It's about really assuming our responsibility to help each other and about truly giving up a piece of yourself to become part of a greater whole. Because in the end, that's how we really achieve things, or at least the things that will actually give us some sense of fulfillment and purpose. And I just feel like we need to make more of an effort to highlight and centralize stories like these. Because again, this is real, this really happened, we do have this in us. And I think our world would be a much better place if we were to remind ourselves of that more often. I feel like I've been coming back to this subject over and over this year, because although 2022 has also been a year in which the banality of modern evil and the general lack of humanity has been on display quite predominantly, to say the least, it has not discouraged me in the slightest. I still feel hopeful and optimistic. I still feel driven to create, to make these videos and to continue to bring my voice into the world in a way that, hopefully, makes it a little bit better. And so much of that is because of you. Because of everyone who has been watching my stuff and leaving comments. I do still read all of them, you know. Same goes for all the emails I get and all the donations I receive through PayPal, even though I don't always remember to respond to them. After all these years, this is still a one-man show and I'm just not always able to keep up. I do see everything, and for that, I'm grateful. I see every new patron on my Patreon page, which is still one of the main reasons I'm able to keep all this going. This year, after deliberating with my patrons, I switched to a new model where you can donate per month instead of per video. This way you always know exactly how much you'll donate, and you can even get a nice discount if you pledge for a whole year. I'm still trying to reach my next milestone of 1000 patrons, for which I'll make a giant video about what I deem to be the 50 most meaningful movies ever made. So if you want to make that happen, you know where to go. For now, I think it's time to wrap up. Again, a big thanks to everyone who has been helping me do this. You are what's allowing this to be my full-time job, my full-time commitment. And I want you to know that I see you and I thank you. I hope you have a wonderful new year, and I'll see you all again in 2023. hopefully at the launch of my Nebula class, January 3rd. Honestly though, I'm really excited for it. I've been wanting to make this for years and I can't believe it's finally coming out. So yeah, be sure to check that out and share your thoughts, because I'd love to know what you think about it, and who knows, maybe I'll make more of them in the future. But for now, I'm going to take a few days off. I hope you're able to get some rest too. And again, have a wonderful new year. I'll see you all again in 2023.